This video is brought to you by Ground News. This week has been a good one for the Ukrainian army. As well as the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin, leader of the much-loathed Wagner Group, on Thursday, Ukrainian troops also captured the town of Robotny, breaking through the first of Russia's 3 defensive lines in Zaporizhia. Nonetheless, Ukraine looks unlikely to land a knockout blow anytime soon, and neither side sounds keen on peace, which is why many analysts believe that Ukraine now risks turning into a so-called long war. So in this video, we're going to have a look at what's happening on the battlefield, why this now looks likely to turn into a long war, and why the prospect of a long war leaves Ukraine with a difficult dilemma. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start by taking a look at what's happened in Ukraine since we did our last Ukraine video about 6 weeks ago. As we see it, 2 significant things have happened. The Ukrainians have made further progress in the south of Zaporizhia Oblast, and the Russians have pushed out a bit in the east, moving towards Kupiansk. In the south, earlier this week, the Ukrainians captured the small town of Robotny, a small town that lies on the T-0408 on the way from the Ukrainian town of Orikhiv to the Russian-occupied town of Tokmak, a strategically significant rail hub which supplies Russian troops in the south. Robotny is about 20 kilometers from Tokmak, but it's taken the Ukrainians 2 months to advance roughly 10 kilometers south of Orikhiv, and this is only the first of at least 3 defensive lines. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that Ukraine won't take Tokmak. Ukraine have reliably outperformed expectations, and it's possible that Russia's subsequent defensive lines won't be quite as impenetrable as the first one, but we probably shouldn't expect it to happen anytime soon, not least because Ukraine only has about a month left before the rain and mud sets in. In the east, the Russians have made slight progress towards Kupiansk. For the last few weeks, the Russians have been trying to advance south along the rail line, running from the Russian town of Urazovo down to Kupiansk, but with little success. Nonetheless, it's worth keeping an eye on this, because it'll tell us something about Russia's offensive capacity, which hadn't been tested for a while. Nonetheless, despite Ukraine's success in Robotny, it does look like the front lines are stabilising a bit, and the rate of advance on both sides is clearly decelerating. In some sense, this shouldn't come as a surprise. The Russians have had many months to prepare defensive fortifications and mine the surrounding fields, which makes rapid combined arms offensives difficult, and Ukraine doesn't have the tech or ammo to effectively attrit Russian forces. This looks unlikely to change anytime soon either. While the West is continuing to supply Ukraine with arms and ammo, it's struggling to keep up with Ukraine's consumption rate, especially when it comes to Soviet-era 155M artillery shells, and the more advanced Western tech like F-16s are unlikely to reach the battlefield for at least a year. As the counter-offensive has slowed, the mood music has clearly soured, and a spat has broken out between Ukrainian and Western officials, who have criticised Ukraine's strategy. Anonymous American officials told the New York Times that Ukraine was making a mistake by focusing on long-range weapon systems and Bakhmut, while a leaked battlefield assessment by Germany's Bundeswehr last month faulted the Ukrainian military for not implementing its NATO training. For their part, the Ukrainians fault the West for holding back its most advanced weapon systems, and insist that rapid combined arms offensives are impossible given Russia's defensive operations. While the rate of Ukraine's advance has clearly disappointed some commentators, and Zelensky himself admitted this month that it's happening probably slower than how some people may want or can see it. In retrospect, this is perhaps because Ukraine's rapid success in Kharkiv and Kherson set expectations uncomfortably high. Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov warned a few months ago that hopes surrounding Ukraine's much-anticipated counter-offensive were definitely overheated, and Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs publicly pleaded with intelligence officials to soften their predictions of success. In fact, as the Discord leaks revealed, as early as February, the Pentagon was already warning that the offensive was likely to fall, quote, well short of its stated goals. Nonetheless, many analysts now believe that the fact that Ukraine hasn't landed a decisive blow means that the war is now likely to become a long war, lasting for at least a few more years. There was some hope that a successful counteroffensive would force the Kremlin to negotiate on Zelensky's terms, but peace negotiations now look unlikely. Ukraine has set some pretty maximalist targets, including the recapture of Crimea, and Zelensky has also insisted on the withdrawal of all Russian troops from Ukrainian territories as a prerequisite, which isn't going to happen. Similarly, the Kremlin currently has no interest in peace talks. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said last week that the prospect for negotiations are non-existent, and that Russia regards calls for peace as a tactical ploy to buy time. Citing the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, Lavrov also remarked that the United States does not have the best historical record when it comes to supporting its allies. The Kremlin is clearly gearing up for a long war as well, which is why they've doubled military spending, made preparations for another mobilization, and started trying to reduce Ukraine's supply of foreign currency by trying to prevent Ukraine from exporting its grain. So, if Ukraine does become a long war, who does this benefit? Well, while the collective West clearly has the resources to wear Russia down, Putin will be hoping that he can wait it out until the West loses patience and enthusiasm for Ukraine, and then attrit Ukrainian forces. After all, even if further mobilizations are politically difficult for the Kremlin, Russia has more money, a larger industrial base, and a larger population than Ukraine. A key date here will be the 2024 presidential election, because if Trump wins, assuming he's the Republican candidate, then American support for Ukraine is no longer guaranteed, at least not in its current form. Now, the first thing to say is that Trump won't necessarily stop supporting Ukraine. In fact, he said he'd actually escalate support if Putin doesn't agree to peace.
I would tell Zelensky, no more, you got to make a deal. I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give them a lot. We're going to give them more than they ever got if we have to. I will have the deal done in one day.
Nonetheless, there's at least a risk that Trump would reduce support, especially given the anti-Ukraine sentiment amongst the Republicans. Whereas Biden has made it clear that he wants to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, which is why he's asked the army to start producing over 1 million 155mm shells annually by 2025. Ultimately, this leaves Ukraine's high command with a difficult dilemma. They can either commit to one massive offensive to land a knockout blow on Russia by throwing all its remaining troops at one front and possibly mobilizing even more men, or pull back, protect its remaining forces, and dig in for an attritional war, while hoping that the West, and especially the US, provides enough support to get them through. Which option they opt for obviously remains to be seen. If you do want to find out which way they'll go though, the best way is with Ground News, a website and app designed to help you take the power of the media into your own hands. Here's how it works. Every day, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from all over the world. They then organise these articles by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lean on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. For example, take this story about a Russian pilot defecting to Russia. Ground shows us that 41 outlets are reporting on it, with us able to examine their bias and find that 47% of those lean left, while just 26% lean right. You can then swipe through some of the headlines comparing how different outlets cover it. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. Now, our team at TLDR likes Ground News so much that we decided to offer a 30% discount on the Ground News Vantage plan to all our viewers. And that includes access to a feature called My News Bias, which is basically a dashboard for your news diet. Sign up to find out how your reading habits change over the next week. What are your top sources? Are you engaging with diverse perspectives? What about your favourite topics? Find out with Ground News Vantage, which is 30% off only using our link. So make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.